Manchester City, FC Barcelona, Arsenal, Liverpool. They've all started using this 3-2-4-1 shape, which allows for a box midfield. But what actually is a box midfield, and why have these teams decided to use it, and how has it led to the success of Pep Guardiola's Manchester City in the Champions League, Xavi Hernandez's Barcelona in the league, and Arteta's Arsenal in the Premier League? What is a box midfield? A box midfield is this 3-2-2-3 or 3-2-4-1 WM shape, as some people call it, with a box midfield, as you can see, with four midfielders, which is usually 2 6s and 2 8s or 2 10s. And they can achieve this four midfielders in different ways, such as the inversion of a fullback, or the pushing up of a center back, or a winger dropping inside to become an 8. But the main thing is that there are four midfielders in possession for the team using a box midfield, and against the ball, they typically go with the typical four-back, and they go back to their normal shape in some way. So here you can see Manchester City lining up in the WM box midfield shape against Sevilla in their Super Cup win this season, with Rodri and Akanji, who was pushing up from the back line, forming up the double pivot, while Kovacic and Foden, who are positioning themselves in the half spaces, forming the number 8s in the box midfield. So as you can see here with the square that rectangle that I've created, this is the midfield area, and there is a 4v3 for the red team, which is using a 3-2-4-1 against the yellow team, which is using a typical 4-3-3. And what is good about this 4-3-3 is that teams employing the 3-2-4-1 box midfield shape can work the ball around and keep possession, which helps for teams that want to dominate possession, like Pep Guardiola's Manchester City and Arteta's Arsenal and Xavi's Barcelona. Another thing is that this 4v3 overload creates indecisiveness, and there's always a free man which can move the ball forward, because if the 6 takes the 8, for instance, and the 10 has to move back or something like that, then they can pass the ball around and find 5, who has the whole field before him and can make a forward pass and can distribute the ball. Another thing is that if the 10 drifts out wide, this 10 won't know what to do, or whichever player is marking him won't know what to do, because he can either follow him and create a huge space for the 5 to play the ball into the 9, or he can stay here and he'll just let the 5 play the ball into the 10, who can then play a cross for someone like Haaland to put it into the back of the net. In this clip here from last season's Champions League semi-final between Manchester City and Real Madrid, this can be seen. During Manchester City's possession, Ilkay Gundogan, the left center mid, drifts out wide and drops deep to receive the ball, attracting Valverde, his man, with him. This allows Gundogan to receive the ball while opening up the midfield space where he previously was, which De Bruyne cleverly decides not to occupy and leave for Haaland. Gundogan then decides to stay in this current wide position during the City build-up, forcing Valverde to stay with him and opening up his previously occupied midfield space for Haaland. When Haaland receives the ball, Militao is forced to follow him, leaving space which the winger could have even exploited. However, in this case, Haaland was just used to have an extra passing option in order to complete the build-up and switch the sides. Another possible midfielder movement would be if someone like the number 5 drops into the back line and number 10 is still here. There's still always a 3v3, so it's still an even fight for a midfield duo. And this is also one of the benefits, that one of the 6s can always drop into the back line to create 4-back to build up, which could create indecisiveness for the opponent on who to mark. So in this clip with Arsenal, this can be seen. At first glance, it looks like a 4-3-3 build-up with the CDM slightly towards the left. However, when looking closely, it is actually a 3-2-4-1 build-up with Partey, one of the 2 6s, dropping into the back line to create a back four. This is another example from the same game, from opponents Manchester City this time. At first glance, it seems like a typical 4-3-3 build-up. However, it is actually Rodri, one of the double dropping into the back line in order to form a back four, which he can do due to the presence of Kovacic in the midfield, such as the characteristic of the box midfield which many clubs employ. And next one is that having two eights, if the ball is on the winger, he can expose these half spaces and the winger can play the ball into him for a cross. And if he marks him here, then it's a bit different because this 6 can run in and then he can mark, and then there's still space. So there's always something that can be created, either through the middle, or if he plays in here, or if the 8 makes us run into the half space like in a 4-3-3, then he can just pass the ball here if there's no one marking him. Then he can just pass the ball here and he can just cross it in. Here is an example of this positive of the box midfield from Manchester City's Champions League semi-final game against Real Madrid. Here you can see Kevin De Bruyne in the half space as one of the 8s, and Kroos marking him in that space. Kevin De Bruyne then scans and sees the space which he can open up by performing an underlap. He then does the underlap, requiring Kroos to follow him and opening up space for Gundogan to run into and receive the ball in order to create the chance which leads to the 2-0 for Manchester City in the Champions League semi-final. And another thing is the build-up. This is how a typical 4-3-3 build-up might look like. But with a 3-2-4-1, teams can use the ability of their goalkeepers with their feet to still have a 4-back in build-up and actually use their goalies and have a basically 11 against 10. Now the goalies can be fully utilized if this was the center back who was pushing up, for example in City's case, and then build up, the goalie can just pass it to here, and now you have 2 6s to play into, or you still have the goalie on the other side. Obviously you need the center backs and the goalie to be very comfortable on the ball, but that's always the case with possession teams like with Ederson for City and Ter Stegen in Barcelona and many other possession teams. Here are some examples of this. Here, in a preseason friendly game against Bayern, you can see Ederson pushing up unorthodoxically high to form the back line in the City's build-up. And here, in a Premier League game against Burnley, Ederson again does the same thing and pushes up unorthodoxically high to form the back four in the build-up. And another thing is that in the transition, let's say that the red team has the ball, and they're trying to progress the ball forward, and then they suddenly lose the ball, and someone like, let's say the number 8 has space to progress, and he has the number 10 supporting him, and this 10 is already behind because it's a counter. The 8 can progress, the 9 can make a run, and then they would still cover here. But the difference here is, because usually in a counter-attack, you would want the players to play out wide because it's harder, because then if the ball is out wide, you would only have one option to either cross it or play it back. And that's what they're basically forcing by shutting down the center, which basically covers most of the chance of danger during a transition, aside from the crosses. With a box midfield, so just like any other formation, obviously box midfields have downsides to it. And the first problem is, as you can see that I've outlined these wide areas, that the wingers are completely isolated in their team and there's not a lot of support for them, and they can be forced to use their one-on-one qualities against the fullback or be like heavily dependent on crosses to create chances if the team do make the middle compact, which most teams would. Or this could force, let's say, a Kanji or someone to have to make an overlap from a right center back position. And this is obviously risky because if this overlap doesn't work, let's say the number 3 intercepts the ball, there is obviously all this space forward for them to counter in the wide areas, and great teams can just go forward and even if they're tracking back, they can just whip a ball in, or the number 7 can, if he's a good dribbler, cut the ball in and take a shot and go, and it'll go in. Obviously it won't always go in, but so this brings me to my second point, that even if kanji doesn't overlap, there is still a lot of space in the wide areas in case of any ball losses, and this could be good for opposition wingers, like we'll see Vinicius Jr., like Salah, like anyone who City are playing against opposition wingers. They'll have a lot of freedom in these wide areas, and this would obviously give them a lot of chances to create things. This disadvantage can be seen by this clip here from the UEFA Super Cup match between City and Sevilla, with City using the box midfield. Here you can see that City lose the ball, and if you pause here, you can see that Sevilla have a lot of space in the wide areas to counter, and good and fast wingers can expose these wide areas in transitions by creating chances like this through crosses. And Sevilla got a massive chance, which they should have scored, but it was saved by Ederson. And this shows how the advantage, which I previously mentioned, of forcing the teams out wide in the transition can also be a disadvantage if the team has good and fast wingers. And finally, another downgrade is that there is not a lot of depth in teams for players like John Stones, who can push up the field from center back against the ball to midfielder on the ball, or players like, let's say, Rico Lewis or Zinchenko or whatever, who can play as an inverted fullback and are fullbacks against the ball and midfielders on the ball. And this can obviously impact the team deeply if, let's say, for example, Arsenal last season at the middle of the season, Zinchenko had an injury and he couldn't play the games, and obviously this was a huge blow to Arsenal, as they didn't have any other player like Zinchenko who could invert from left back. How teams get into a box midfield. So the first way is through the inversion of a fullback into the midfield, like how Arsenal and Liverpool do it. So Liverpool inverts Trent Alexander-Arnold into the midfield, and usually with the inversion of a fullback into midfield, this also requires the other fullback to invert defensively into the center back. In Arsenal's case, they do it with the inversion of Zinchenko into midfield, and then White, as the right back, will have to invert into center back. And they do this to reap the advantages of the box midfield, however, also to take advantage of the fullback's passing range from a more central position, like, for example, with Trent Alexander-Arnold for Liverpool. The second way in which teams get into a box midfield is through the pushing up of a center back, like Stones or Kanji in the case of Manchester City. So in this case, both fullbacks have to defensively invert. And the benefit of this is that by pushing up a center back, the center back has less distance to cover to get back to the center back position when City or teams who do this do lose the ball, instead of the inverted fullback who has more distance to cover. Another thing is that they can have 4 extremely defensive-minded center backs or players on the field, one of which who can play the 6th position, which contributed to City's defensive stability last season. So another way how teams get into the box midfield is through the dropping inside of the winger, like Gavi for Barcelona last season. So the winger, Gavi, drops inside to form the double 8 with Pedri, and this means that the 8, De Jong last season, had to drop deeper to form the double pivot. And to account for this free space, the left back, Balde, had to push up to become the winger, and then to evenly defend, the right back, Koundé, had to invert defensively to form, and now they have the 3-2-4-1 shape. And obviously this gave Barcelona the benefits of the box midfield for their possession game, but it also helped Barca solve their personnel problems of fitting 4 talented midfielders into the same starting lineup: Gavi, Pedri, De Jong, and Busquets last season. So the final way in which teams get into the box midfield is through the pushing up of the wingbacks, like how Chelsea and Frankfurt did a few years ago. So this is by far the most straightforward way out of all of the ways how the teams get into a box midfield. And this is actually different to all the other ways, because all the other ways the teams start out in a 4-3-3. However, in this way, the Frankfurt and Chelsea start off in a 5-2-2-1 or 3-4-2-1 if you'd like. And with the ball, the wingbacks push up to give the width in the attack. And the benefit for these defensive teams, Frankfurt and Chelsea, of using the box midfield is so that they can congest the middle of the field against the ball for the opponents to stop the opponents from creating chances through the middle of the field. And it gives them defensive stability, which led to Chelsea winning the Champions League in 2021 and Frankfurt winning the Europa League the year after. So what do you guys think about the box midfield? Make sure to comment down below what you guys think about the box midfield, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And comment down as well if you would like to see a video about the diamond midfield.